Not too long ago, we managed to sail on past our 60th episode, and looking back on all we'd accomplished, we saw a lot of high points that we were really proud of. I mean, we've talked about genre defining directors like David Cronenberg, Herschel Gordon Lewis, Lucio Fulci. We've also featured directors that maybe don't get as much love in the horror community, like Norman J. Warren or William Girdler. We focused on important subgenres like the universal monster films from horror's golden age all the way over to the sexy vampires that inhabited European exploitation horror of the 1970s. So we were looking at our output and we were pretty proud of it, but as we looked closely, one thing became pretty glaring pretty quickly. Not one of those directors we featured was a woman. And let's face it, if we go back very far at all, we run out of road on female horror directors writ large. I mean, there was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, that women just didn't make films at all. I mean, for Christ's sake, the first woman to win an Oscar for Best Director was Catherine Bigelow. You know what year that was? 2009. You know how many years before that they'd given an Oscar for Best Director? 81. 81 years it took them to find a Best Director that was a female. And in the horror genre, the same is roughly true. We don't really start seeing a sizable chunk of horror films being directed by women until about the last 20 years or so. Now, of course, there are certainly notable exceptions, and we should talk about them for a second here. Alice Guy Blanche, a once nearly forgotten name, may well have made the first narrative film, but she almost certainly made the first female directed horror films, including The Vampire, The Monster and the Girl, and a really early adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Pit and the Pendulum. And there's directors like Lois Weber, perhaps the first auteur, writer, director. And then, of course, you got seminal art house director Maya Deren, who made films that horror fans could really put their arms around and call their own. But in reality, until recently, it was kind of an anomaly for a woman to helm a horror film. For myself, and speaking of Catherine Bigelow, I can still remember the surprise I felt when I discovered that hard as nails vampire film Near Dark from 1987 was directed by a woman. I had no idea. Our beloved genre has done a lot of growing up since 1987, and we here on Discover the Horror, we wanted to join the party. So for this episode, John provided a list of films directed by women, and each of us picked a title to champion. Each one of us picked a film that had a few things in common, as it turns out. All of our films were made after 2010. Each one of them touched issues of family life, and more than anything, each one was a hard kick square in the soft parts. These are not feel good, funny horror flicks. These are get you down and keep you there assaults that find you hoping you've got a good therapist or a close friend with a good ear programmed into your phone. So we asked ourselves about women in horror, and we're left with even bigger questions about women who make horror as we tackle 2012's Chained, 2014's Honeymoon, and 2020's Relic. Welcome to Discover the Horror. Our goal is to introduce you to horror you've never seen and give you new ways to see horror you've loved for years. I'm Aaron Abishan. I teach film studies and film production at a university and write about horror just about anywhere I can.
I'm John Kitley, staff writer for Horror Hound Magazine, and I run Kitley's Crypt.
I'm Damian Galanick, co-creator of Living Dead Dolls.
So, before we get into the movies, can you guys remember the first time that you knew you were watching a horror film that was directed by a woman?
It certainly wasn't Humanoids from the Deep.
I
Well, you're saying that you didn't know that at the time?
I did not know that at the time when
Yeah.
I first saw it. I would probably have to agree with you. It's probably Near Dark, and I don't think it wasn't until later that I realized it was directed by a woman.
I knew beforehand with Near Dark only because it was covered a lot in the magazines and stuff. So there was not that they were hyping that it was a woman director, but it was known. So it got a lot of press, and I remember hearing about that. But it is amazing. I mean, I always knew of Doris Wishman, who is a female director, mainly in exploitation
Sure.
films. Um, but some of the early slasher films were even women. I think it's Slumber Party Massacre. The first one was a woman.
Indeed.
Um,
Mm,
but
yeah.
again, I don't think it's as widespread as it is now. You really had to hunt and pick back then to look for them, but now it's there are a lot of films out there these last decade, I think.
Mary Lambert's Pet Cemetery was another one,
Yes.
and
And I
she did.
still forget that that was a woman that directed that film.
Yeah. That was probably one of the first ones what I remembered that it was a woman and you walked away going, God damn, I feel like crap.
Now, that'll be a theme that we'll revisit over and over
Exactly.
again
So
tonight.
I think that was a warning sign of the future. But again, it shows you how effective they were.
That may have been the first one I remember being consciously remembering it being directed by a woman.
Yeah, so can you think of a film then that you can't imagine a man directing? Like, we talk about those. Like I said, I was surprised that Near Dark wasn't. I mean, it sounds shitty to say it, but I was surprised because I was so used to directors being men. And in 1987, I was in high school. I was still a kid. Um, but like you said, it was like Near Dark felt like just another horror movie. It didn't seem to have the imprint of a woman necessarily that I could see. Pet Cemetery, the same thing. But I think that there are some now that you look at and you go, okay, I think you almost had to have a female perspective to do that one. For me, I'm giving the example I would give is The Babadook, directed by Jennifer Kent. That very much seems like I can't imagine a man writing and directing The Babadook. It just feels like it needed a woman's insight to be able to pull that one off.
I think even more so with her next film, The Nightingale,
Mm-hmm.
which is even harder to watch than Babadook. And I don't mean that as a negative thing. I mean it's a rough film, very depressing. But that would have been a hard one to come from a man's brain. I think it almost sounds bad to say that too, because we're talking about a creative element here. But some of these, and it's just odd that the three of these films that we picked are very similar, like you mentioned, and are not happy films. You don't walk away just go running in the sunshine after these.
Well, and it's something that I think bears mentioning and bears talking about because it's like, you know, I think that we have to at least examine the idea that different kinds of people bring different kinds of things to the medium, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, uh, it's not to say that a woman can't make a horror film that looks like it was directed by a man, but there are certainly going to be horror films that look like they're directed by women. And our first film is interesting because I don't feel like it engages with women's issues very much. In fact, the women are almost secondary. They're completely secondary. They're almost cattle in the story. Um, so it's an interesting thing. But you're right. I mean, the more I examine this, the more that I find myself going, well, the one thing that seems to be true is that the women directors who I've really found resonant with me make films that are gruesomely grim. They're hard to get through. Like horror means something to at least this batch of women that is never very much fun. And then, like you said, that's not a. I'm not downgrading them at all. I'd say every one of these films that we're going to talk about tonight, I found masterful, but not one of them did I find like that was great. I can't wait to show that to everybody I know. Like
I mean, I don't in viewing. I don't judge like, oh, this was directed by a man, this was directed by a woman. It's I judge it as it's either good or it's not. I really don't
Right.
care who directed it.
I almost think it's almost like when you see a film from a different country that you're not familiar with, you'll see a different viewpoint or a different aspects of their style of filmmaking that you might not have been familiar with. That may come into play sometimes, maybe even subconsciously. And like when you first asked that question, Aaron, I'm thinking, oh well, let's see, Inside. Oh wait, that's directed by guys. And I kept thinking of female-driven stories.
Yeah, like
right.
Ginger Snaps, right?
Yeah.
But
Oh,
directed
oh
by a
no,
guy.
that's a guy.
Yeah.
But there is that. I think it's a French film, In My Skin.
Hmm.
Marina
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Devan. She directed and Ann stars in it, and again, that's a very uncomfortable story. So I don't know. It's going through there and finding title after title where I'm going, holy crap, that's really well made film. That's really really good. It's surprising. Um, how many there are out there, and as like I said, and especially in the last couple of decades, um, it's shocking.
But it really, like I said, it doesn't matter.
No,
I mean, it matters in the sense that you want to see more women being directors and stuff like that. But it doesn't matter whether, oh, this movie is great. Oh my gosh, it was directed by a woman. Who cares? Was it a good movie or not?
But I also think that, so I used to work with this person, and she said to me once, because I'd say things like that about my job, and this woman said, "Yeah, but it's different to have a woman in the room because she has a different perspective." And I started thinking about that more, and I think about, like, could a movie like Ganja and Hess have been directed by a white guy, or could a movie like, I don't know, any of Paul Nash's films been directed by
Well,
an American guy, or you know what I mean? Like, it takes a certain perspective.
look at Jack Hill's Coffee.
Yeah.
Could that would you have guessed like a white guy directed Coffee?
I mean, I don't know. That is the question, right? Watching that horror noir documentary got me thinking about that more and more too. The directors of blaxploitation who were themselves black, and the directors of blaxploitation who weren't. I don't have a dog in the fight, but I know that there's a lot of people out there who feel strongly that diversity matters, not just because we want to see more faces who don't just look like all three of ours, but because we want to see the perspective that they bring to the table.
Right.
Yeah,
But I think at the end of the day, if it's an entertaining, engaging film, that's the where the end credit is.
yeah,
Depending, I mean, irregardless of who directed it, I just think that we're seeing more films directed by women, which I think is great because again, they're great films, and we're just seeing more women behind the camera, and I think that's amazing.
yeah. And it is going to bring a different perspective, I think. And I think that for our first movie, Chained, showed that.
Yeah, that's one I would not have pegged as being a female director because it's a brutal film, and it doesn't, like you mentioned, Aaron, the women are pretty much cattle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So should we get into Chained?
Yeah, let me take some Adderall.
All right.
let the heaviness sink in.
Cheers.
The chuckles end here.
The 2012 film Chained by director Jennifer Lynch tells the story of a little boy and his mother who are kidnapped by a cabbie named Bob, who, as it turns out, is a serial killer. After dispatching the mother, the little boy is dragged into the claustrophobic home that functions as a stark explanation for the inside of Bob's diseased mind. The boy, now rechristened Rabbit, will be forced to make Bob's breakfast and clean up after Bob, which includes burying the cooling bodies of the young women Bob drags into the house and carves into pieces, usually while raping them. Rabbit grows into a young man who sleeps on a cot in the kitchen, wears a chain around his ankle for almost a decade, and develops a strange symbiotic relationship with his captor, who begins to try to treat him almost like a son. Glimpses into Bob's past reveal what a dangerous thing it is to be a part of Bob's immediate family, but Rabbit has very few choices left to him in the claustrophobic little house where every aspect of his life and surroundings exist only to help tear people apart and satisfy the lusts of a man who murdered his mother. Rabbit has to find a way to try to survive as the blood-curdling screams of Bob's dying victims bounce off the fortified walls and their blood pools on the floor awaiting his mop. Now, this is about as far from warm and fuzzy as you can get and stretches the boundaries of what horror can do, and the question of whether or not it's a horror film at all will probably come up. But it also manages to be one of the most horrifying films I've ever seen. Jennifer Lynch's direction is careful and methodical. The cinematography from Shane Daly carefully expresses the relationships between the characters, and the editing from Daryl K. Davis and Chris A. Peterson takes its time to allow tensions to develop to their tearing point and well past it. But none of this would be meaningful without the astonishing performances by Vincent D'Onofrio as Bob in what I think of as a sort of defining performance, and Eamon Farron as the grown rabbit. Their individual performances and their chemistry together pushes their relationship, as twisted as it is, to the forefront of this uncomfortable and, in my personal opinion, pretty masterful film. So what did you folks think on this viewing of Chained?
My first notes, and I'd seen this originally when it first came out, but my notes on rewatching it this time is just D'Onofrio is a bad man.
Yeah, man, he gets inside of it.
This is my first time viewing this, and I have to say he makes the movie. If it wasn't for him, and I honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of this. I liked it; it was a good film, but I have no need to revisit it, and not because of its subject matter, but my personal taste. And I know I'm in a minority with a lot of people, but I don't care about serial killer movies. They just really have no interest for me. I like more of the supernatural aspect of my horror, and I know everyone's into true crime documentaries and forensic files and stuff, and all that stuff just meh. It does nothing for me. So with this being more focused on it was an interesting story, and like D'Onofrio, this movie would be nothing without him. I think he completely sealed the deal on it. But in the end, it was still like a serial killer film with a kind of a I want to say, well, a little bit of a twist ending that felt a little, I don't want to say forced, but maybe rushed.
Yeah, the twist is very surprising, but I
Yeah.
agree with you. I don't know that the twist is what makes the movie for me. In fact, it almost feels a little extraneous.
Yeah.
I think and I kind of agree with you, Damien, as far as the serial killer type movies. The ones that I end up liking are this one where the serial killer himself or herself is gives a really good characterization in their performance. It's not a mindless killer just going around killing people. You see the inside of this guy, you understand kind of how he got to be the way he is. And it's all into performance. That not that you like the guy, and obviously here you do not, but it gives you a little bit more of the performance of the character, so you're not just watching a guy in a mask butchering
Well,
people.
it's not even like a serial killer mask like something like Maniac. He's a serial killer, but that movie is just a fantastic film, and it does have an I don't want to say surreal, but like a little supernatural edge where he's envisioning the mannequins to come to life, and he has that nightmare where his mother's
Yeah,
hands come out of the grave and stuff, and then just the whole greasy, sweaty feel of that whole movie. I don't want to say is a character unto itself, but it adds an element into that film. Where I look at something like Silence of the Lambs, fantastic film, great film, but for me it was like, yeah, it was good, whatever, you know.
right.
Because it doesn't add any of that. I don't know, maybe not exploitation, but horror or Spinell sweat.
And someone could have marketed that.
Yeah,
No, I do think it's D'Onofrio's performance. And I was, when we were watching this with me and my wife, and I told her, I'm like, I would have, there's no way I would have been one of the female actresses having to act with him in this film. I would be scared shitless.
I bet it was terrifying.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, because he's going to be in the character and he's a big guy. And yeah, I would have been terrified.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet that the guy that played Rabbit, Eamon, was probably the same way. I mean, he's kind of a little twinky fellow, and he was definitely not the same material as Vincent D'Onofrio was, and they get pretty physical a few times.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, you feel it over and over again. But I think that, to what you said, Damien, I'm also kind of the same way. I'm with both of you. I generally don't care for serial killer kinds of things. I'm interested in, I used to read a lot about serial killers, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe we have seen too many sort of slick, stylized versions of these things. But this one feels, I mean, being a serial killer looks depressing. I mean, if it's real. There's nothing that looks. I don't know. There's nothing that looks anything like glamorous or like fascinating about it. It just looks like what a horrendous life that these people lead. And then you've got this question, right? I mean, to survive, Rabbit has to adapt. And so you've got this nature versus nurture question that becomes front and center through the whole thing where, Bob is pushing him to become like Bob. And he even sort of, teases with like, hey, maybe you want some freedom. Maybe you don't want to be on this chain for the rest of your life. But man, the metaphor that is created there, where it's like you're not going to be, because as I mentioned in the intro, Rabbit is literally on a chain. He tries to escape early on, and Bob clamps him in a chain, and he stays in that chain for his entire childhood.
Yeah.
And then, to say, hey, I'll let you out of this chain, but to do so, you're going to be chained to this reality forever. To do so, you're going to be chained to being like me. Um, oh my God, I thought that was just brilliant. So I don't think it would have been possible without that. And the other thing I liked about it is how it hyper stylized the production design, where that house is unbelievably gruesome. I mean, they really thought of everything. It's out in the middle of nowhere. There's no light that ever gets in. It's just metal that's been, bolted over the windows, and there's convenient ways to get to the crawl space in the basement, John Wayne Gacy style, except it's got creepy Christmas lights down there because he's down there so often. So I found the production design of this one also to be like a
Yeah.
character. There's two
Even
characters in this, but the house is a character too.
even the furniture, like the Formica kitchen table he has with the one chair, it's very basic and as if only one person lived there and didn't do much else. He had his little old Archie Bunker chair, one chair in front of his TV, and that was it.
And then even when he progresses where he trusts him, he gets Rabbit his own little chair that literally looks like he found it in a dumpster.
Yeah. Well, and then as to back up a bit, the way that their relationship progresses is that from the time that he's a 9-year-old until he's 18 or 19, if he's allowed to, because he's only allowed to do whatever Bob tells him that he can do. When he eats, he's only allowed to eat the dregs left over from Bob's cereal bowl in the morning, for example. I mean, it's this very regimented, very tiny life. But the thing that I found so amazing, and this is part of the cinematography, there's only 2 characters, right? So there can only be a few ways to shoot it. But you'll find that the cinematography does these really interesting things where it singles the characters out a lot, but then when they get put together, they're almost on top of each other most of the time.
Yeah.
So you constantly have so what I'm getting to is that whenever he goes to watch TV, he watches TV sitting between Bob's legs, which is the creepiest shit I've ever seen in my life. I mean, can you imagine the person who murdered your mom? And by the way, that's not a spoiler. That happens like in the first 5 to 10 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
So, it's still pretty shocking, but if you go into this movie knowing anything about it, by the time you first see Vincent D'Onofrio, you're going to know what he is. So I think
Yeah.
that's, I hope that doesn't spoil the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it.
No, it's definitely a grim. It's a good story. It's a grim movie. It's great acting on everybody's part, really.
Yeah. I remember when I was watching it this time, parts of me are, especially when Rabbit is older, and you wanted to go, why isn't he just stabbing him in the neck or with a fork? I mean, how come he doesn't get out? But then when you realize this kid has been taught since 9 years old
Yeah.
and pretty much brainwashed, he doesn't know any better. He doesn't know anything outside of what a 9-year-old would know
Yeah.
that Bob hasn't taught him. So which kind of explains the ending. I don't know if you guys noticed there's audio going during the credits.
Oh, the garage door and stuff.
Yeah, you're not really sure because I don't want to give any away to the endings, but when the ending happens and you're like, well, what the hell is he doing? He has no idea of what he's supposed to do because
Yeah.
he's been transitioned into that for the last decade.
Right. I mean, the only thing he knows is what he sees on TV when he's allowed to
Mm-hmm.
watch it, and reading medical books that Bob gives him.
And the brief interactions that he has with women who are being drug in there almost, and that's what I think is so fascinating about it. As soon as you see the inside of that house, I think you know what your fate is if you're one of those women. I mean, it is so set up to everything in that house either feeds Bob to keep him alive or functions so that he can murder people. And that's so singular and single-minded. It's one of those things that I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but when I think of serial killers, I think of like the Ed Gein, the guy living in filth and shit piled up, up to his eyeballs everywhere. And there's nothing like that in this place. There's nothing in the place. There's just a table and a cot and a chair and a TV, and everything that's in the house has a purpose. When we first see Rabbit, when he's putting something in that box, we later learn that the only things that I can see that Bob keeps besides the TV and ways to feed himself and drink beer are mementos from his kills, the driver's licenses from the people who have died, and the things that he cuts out of the newspaper, which also becomes Rabbit's job. He has to cut the shit out of the newspaper about the kills, which is
Yeah.
it's all that he knows. His entire life is both of their lives are swamped up in murder.
The fact that one of their games is testing each other's knowledge of the driver's license
Yeah.
is about as chilling and scary as you can get, because they're memorizing addresses, weight, information from the driver's license of the people that he has murdered. You're like, that's a fucked up way to play Uno.
Well, because you know what that did for me? It counterpoints another scene, which I thought was kind of flat, honestly. I don't know, his explanation, because at one point Rabbit asks, "Why do you do what you do?" And it doesn't go well, like you would imagine that it's not going to. But he says something to the effect of, "Because they're whores," which is such like a pat answer for a serial killer type. But you get the impression that in order to be a serial killer, you have to dehumanize. You can't have empathy for these people. So it's utterly fascinating that he plays this game where he remembers their humanness. He remembers their eye color and their weight and where they lived, and talks about what kind of neighborhoods they were. Like that he drags back up who they were as human beings as a part of that. And then looks for the stories about it. That creates this just really disturbing question in my mind about what it was that he was getting out of this whole thing.
I think the newspaper clippings is more just trophies.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, because Rabbit had to make a scrapbook of them all.
Multiple scrapbooks.
Yeah.
Let me ask
That's
you
a
guys.
big basement.
Yeah, right. Let me ask you guys this. Um, so originally, Jennifer Finch wasn't too interested in directing this because of the amount of violence that was in the script, and she rewrote it, reducing some of the violence and not necessarily condoning what the characters did, but to make it more focused on the characters in the film. I wonder what this would have been like if it had shown the violence in the movie, because it really, a lot of stuff's done behind closed doors. You don't really see really any of the rape, any of the murder so much. It's some of the after effects, but I wonder if there was more gratuitous elements in this, if this would have changed the movie that much. Would have made it even harder to watch? Would have made me more interested in it?
I think what you don't see is I found more terrifying, because all you hear is the screams. There's one shot of him naked, kind of covered in blood, laying on a naked person, one of the girls. And you don't really see anything of what he's done, but it's just that one image that you see. And then you, with all the screaming and all that you've heard, to me, it's like, I think it's more terrifying not seeing what he's actually doing, because it just leads up to your imagination of, God forbid, what this guy's actually doing to these women.
Because it does show some gore in the aftermath. When that one girl stumbles out and you see that she's still alive, he's just been carving on her. She's just slit open in several places. That's the way that he does it. So you get a sense of what that's like. And you see a couple of aftermath killings too. But like John said, you just mostly hear the screaming. And that first little bout, whenever you hear the mother screaming, she's the only character until way, way later that we even see as a human being. For the most part, they
Yeah,
just get drug in and slaughtered.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the one you feel for. The rest are statistics,
Yeah.
more or less. Apparently, in the original script, Bob was supposed to keep pieces of victims in jars, and Jennifer Lynch cut that all out.
That would almost seem a little stereotypical.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. There was this, for me, the production design had this sort of combatant quality to it, because in my head, as I was writing my notes out about the production design, I might even have it here, I don't know, but Um, I think I erased it because I was like, "Ah, this place is filthy." And then I looked more closely, and the place isn't filthy at all. It's very clean, actually. But there's this feeling of just age and decay. Nothing is actively decaying, but everything looks like it's just inches from starting somehow. I don't know how to describe it, but the production design is genius in this thing. Um, and so to me, the movie already, so there's something about like chopped up body parts that not only seems extra heinous, but it seems extra filthy to me. Like it seems like now you've got rot smell. I mean, there had to be, it had, that
Right.
house had to stink like dead people
Yeah.
like crazy. But but there'd be even worse of that, you know. And so I don't know. For me, it's like, would, I feel like it got enough of that across without needing it to be there, but I don't
Right.
know.
See, I almost think that the house is the third character.
Yeah.
You have Bob, you have Rabbit, and then there is the house as a character, because you get it's like you said, it's not a happy place to be at, and just the look of it, it makes you feel, if you're in that place, it's not going to end well.
No, no, it's that's what's kind of amazing. And you realize that Rabbit had to think about it sometimes, that besides Bob, Rabbit was the only person who ever walked through that door that walked back out in a decade. Ever one,
Yeah,
you know, nobody else
Yeah.
ever came there. They
yeah.
couldn't have. Which does beg the question about little simple shit like what happens when the electricity's on the fritz, or what happens when the
Yeah.
plumbing goes weird. You know, he just he
Yeah.
calls nobody is what I'm guessing. But
He does it himself. But there's even there are parts of him, of Bob, that I don't know if he's doing it just to torment Rabbit. Like in the beginning when he's still a kid, oh, here, there's something about in the paper about you and your mom, that they basically stopped looking for you.
right, right.
And it's like, damn, that's another little knife twist, you know? Oh, look here, looks like your dad's getting married. And what the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that they had the character of Rabbit go under the table because there's literally nowhere for him to go. I mean, can you imagine being a teenager and going through all the things that every one of us goes through as a teenager? But you not only don't have a room, you don't have any place you can ever hide. You can never get away from it. You can never get away from it. I mean, it like so they I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'll say that they leave the ending open enough that it makes you wonder, you know, with everything that's happened, what happens next?
Yeah. Yeah. Because he says right in the beginning, one of the, when he's to the young Rabbit, if you don't clean, if you don't keep the house clean, that's a beating. If you try to escape, that's a beating. If you get in my way, that's a beating. And this is your world now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And you're and a 9-year old kid.
Yeah.
You see how he obeys because he has 10 seconds to open the door when he comes knocking, to unlock it when he brings in a victim, and the
Yeah.
movie opens like that, and you hear him like see him panicking and start counting 1, 2, 3, and he's racing to get to the door because he knows how long it's going to take him to get to the door to unlock it before, because he doesn't want to get the beating if he's 11 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a brutal film, and like we said in the beginning, I do agree that if D'Onofrio wasn't in it, I don't know if it would have attracted me as much, because I
Yeah.
just think he's amazing. But he once again brings this character to life, where you're like, dude, I would, meeting you in real life, I would be like, you're a bad man.
Yeah, because it's definitely an unpleasant film. It's not like it's unpleasant, but it's not like Martyrs or something like
No,
that.
no,
No.
With the kidnapping. But yeah, it's D'Onofrio. I don't think this would have been. Might have been seemed more generic if it wasn't for him. If they had another actor, unless it
Yeah.
was some other phenomenal actor. But you needed someone in that role to carry this film and make it so believable and impactful.
yeah,
Yeah. And Bob is such an interestingly written character. I can imagine why D'Onofrio himself was attracted to it. Just because he has this worldview that's kind of impenetrable, and you get little glimpses into his past, so you get a feel for it. But uh, I love that part Well, it's not one part, but overall, I noticed it twice, and I imagine it was in there more. But a part of his worldview was things were bad. When things were bad, they were fucked. Did you catch that when he was like, did your father take you out and throw the ball around, or was he just fucked? And then he was like, if you don't have an education, you're fucked. Like fucked
Yeah.
meant something to him.
Yeah.
And so there was like there were these little tells that he would give about his personality that I thought were really, really fascinating and really added. I don't know. I would love to see a Vincent D'Onofrio interview. I was sad that at least the disc I have of this doesn't have much of anything in the way of special features. And I want an hour of Vincent D'Onofrio talking about how he created Bob. Whenever Rabbit was trying to escape that time and he made it out onto the roof and then he was trying to climb down and Bob was throwing rocks at him and hit him and knocked him down. And he had that one line. He said, "You're a paper doll." I just love
Well,
that line.
the thing where he asks him about, you ever put a puzzle together with all the pieces? Well, people are like that. They're fuck. What are these pictures on the outside and parts on the inside, pieces inside, and you're sitting there going, "Holy shit!" That's what he sees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's talking about the psychology of it, but what Rabbit hears based on his experience is, you know, D'Onofrio is basically saying, "I want to show you how people are built. I want you to learn how people are put together." But everything in Rabbit's worldview has suggested to him that Bob is saying, "I want to teach you how to take people apart." And that's
Yep.
really that's there too, but I don't think in that moment that's what Bob was saying. And I think that's why he got so mad. I think he thought he was being sly and he was going to get there with him, but because he doesn't have anything else. It's like, he decides he wants to be Rabbit's dad, but the only thing he does is watch TV, drink beer, drive a cab, and literally everything else in the man's life is about murder.
It's almost like he's punishing himself and feels like he has no worth and this is all he's been reduced to and all he can do. And it's not like he wants to any kind of reform at all, you know?
Well, and that's the only time he has power.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, he was abused as a child and he was never the one in power.
Yep. So he is in power when he brings a woman home, and he's also in power over Rabbit of what he makes him do. Um, yeah, it's You're not going to walk away from this film whistling zippity doo dah. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
When he says you're a paper doll, it makes me think like, what is a paper doll, right? It's like it's this formless thing that one is just like the other, and it's been created by someone. It's their perception, and that's got to be how he sees the people that he kills. Um, and so I thought that was such an interesting line because when I first heard it, it was like, "Oh, you're a paper doll because you were easy to knock over." But then it chilled me to the very core of me because I was like, if he sees Rabbit as a paper doll, that means he's seeing Rabbit as not a person, and he kills not a persons, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that struck me as a moment where Rabbit was in real mortal danger and somehow managed to, just this little line that gets dropped out of nowhere. And that's what I really love about this film. It's a slow burn. It's not a fast-paced film by any stretch of the imagination, and you're certainly not going to walk away feeling like John, you said, whistling zippity doo dah, but but at the same time, I personally can't recommend it enough. I just think that unlike you, Damien, I want to watch it again and again and see if I can uncover more of the subtext. Now, I'll say this though. The last time I watched it was the first time I watched it. And while I walked away from it feeling like I liked it, I didn't know if I didn't think I'd probably ever watch it again. I probably only watched it again because I saw an opportunity to see it again and see if how I really felt about it. But boy, this time I found myself falling more deeply in love with it, which makes me sound like a sick fuck.
I mean, right? That's a little slice of life of the depraved serial killer. That's all the movie is, right? It is a slow burn because it's just watching two people interact with each other and nobody else and doing
Yeah.
ghastly deeds.
Truly ghastly. Yeah.
Yeah. If you had a lesser actor in there in the lead, and not that the actor that plays Rabbit, and I don't remember his name off the top of my head, um, he does a good job, but his character is basically shackled anyway figuratively, and so he doesn't really have a personality because he's never been allowed to have one. So it's really D'Onofrio carrying the film, and you're just sitting there watching this, waiting. Is this guy ever going to get out? Is he going to, is he going to turn into Bob Jr.? And
Yeah.
yeah, it's, whew.
And I got to say, the actor, one thing that just messed me up was I was looking him up. Eamon Farron is his name. He's been on a bunch of other stuff, done a lot of TV acting. He's Australian from his origin, but I was looking at his Wikipedia entry, and he's 38 now. He's 38 years old. That's how long ago this movie was made.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh man. Hopefully
So,
he's doing better.
yeah, I hope he made it out okay.
Gained a little weight.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine that's a huge D'Onofrio fan, and she won't watch it because she doesn't want to see him being a bad guy.
I was going to say, how is she a huge D'Onofrio fan then? That's like half of his roles, you know?
Yeah, she probably avoids stuff like that in
The Cell, Daredevil.
Full Metal Jacket. You
Yeah.
know,
I mean, what movie
well,
is he a
even
good guy in?
he was in Law and Order.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
She just watched that over and over again.
Yeah, that's it.
It's really just that.
Yeah,
Ding
just Law and
ding.
Order. But I'll tell you, after watching this movie again, I've often said I don't really like to have favorites of anything because I think the world is a nuanced place. But if pushed very often, I'll often say Peter Cushing just because I like so many Peter Cushing movies so much, and I just think he was a delightful man. But man, after watching this, I'd say Vincent D'Onofrio is definitely, he's closing in because I want to go watch a lot more Vincent D'Onofrio stuff after this second viewing. It's just I think his performance is just that good here.
Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
great actor, and this was unlike anything he's probably played before.
Yeah, and can you imagine going home at night after being Bob? Can you imagine sitting at your house just being like, "Am I being like Bob right now? I better unbob. I gotta debob."
Like I said, I would not want to be one of the actresses on set. Oh my god. Okay, this is going to get kind of real for a minute, so just trust me.
Are you willing to go with me to this place? Fuck
Yeah.
no.
Next.
Yeah.
They got a line of women. Next. Try the
Yeah.
next one.
So,
Good stuff.
yeah, I can't say enough good things about this one for myself, but so hopefully if you've listened to the show long enough, you know the differences of our personalities and you'll take that and decide for yourselves.
Yeah, definitely worth a watch. It's worth a watch. It's a good film.
Yep. Okay, so the film I chose was Honeymoon from 2014, which I ended up watching, I think, in May of 2015. And I don't remember if it was either from a recommendation or I saw it on Prime, but I watched it and it blew me away. Like Chain, it is a very simple story with a very, very small cast, but there's a lot going on here. The story is about Paul and Bee, who are newlyweds, off to Bee's family cabin on a secluded lake for their honeymoon. We get to see a little prehistory of them during the opening credits about how they met and their big wedding day. They get to the cabin and all seems right in the world. They head to the local eatery to get some food, only to find it closed when they walk in. In fact, a couple that are working there, one of them is Will, who is an old childhood friend of Bee's, acts very strange. When his wife Annie shows up, he gets even stranger and even a bit violent. So something is definitely going on in that relationship. In the middle of that night, Paul wakes up to go fishing. Then, after he's dressed and ready to go, realizes it's way too early, decides to go back to bed, only to find Bee missing. He frantically searches the cabin and starts outside, finally finding her standing out in the woods, completely naked and very confused. The next morning, she seems fine, as if nothing happened. But Paul is a little concerned, especially when apparently she has forgotten how to make French toast by just laying the plain bread on the hot griddle. As time passes, Paul starts to notice more and more odd things about Bee, like her using words the wrong way, and the sense of paranoia starts to set in more and more, as there's obviously something wrong with Bee. But she's no help, and he can't figure it out. I'll leave the story at that because I don't want to give too much away, but I think figured as kind of a very, very small cast version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The film stars Harry Treadaway and Rose Leslie as Paul and Bee. Um, they do an incredible job carrying the weight of this story because it's basically them throughout the whole movie. It was directed and co-written by Lee Janiak, and this was her first feature film. And she had just recently did the Fear Street series for Netflix. I think between her, Treadaway, and Leslie, they bring such a sense of paranoia and this loss of hope, seeing your loved one slowly become someone different, and that feeling of helplessness that just immediately captures the audience and pulls them through this very, very harrowing story. What did you guys think of this one?
Harrowing is what I is what I said. Harrowing. This movie is harrowing. You're right. That is the right word for this movie. Um, this is one of those movies that if you watch for the first 66 minutes and don't think it's a horror movie, it would be understandable because it doesn't really turn into one until then. But everything it builds that allows it to turn into a horror movie is so important for that turn that it finally takes whenever the body horror starts. Because I read about this movie, I'd never seen it before, and I read about it, and they talked about it having body horror elements. And boy, by the end of the first hour, I was like, "Where's this? Where's the body horror in this movie?" And then it shows up. So uh, I think this was a brilliant, brilliant movie that I walked away from going. Ugh.
I had seen this before, and I think it might have been on your recommendation, John. And so this was my second time watching. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more the second time around. First time not knowing what I was getting into, which is always good because it's a pleasant surprise. But this time knowing what to look for and picking up on that kind of stuff, I enjoyed.
Yeah, I think there's little. I mean, it's the story is unveiled pretty early on. You know what's going on, um, but there's little. I like the little nuances of her transformation when she's starting to lose more of her humanity, and when she says, I'm going to go take a sleep,"
Yeah,
and Paul's like, "What?" And then she realizes, oh, this, and so that you start to pick up as Paul does these changes in her, and the fact that they're literally newlyweds and they obviously didn't meet, they haven't been like together years and years and years, they're relatively new together, and to see this person that you just married slowly change in front of you, and he can't figure it out because every time he questions her, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong, I'm fine. And then when shit obviously goes wrong, he gets even more and more freaked out.
yeah, right. I mean that's one of the things that this movie shows with being married couples. As much as you think you know someone, you don't really know them, and people are always changing, right? So
Yeah.
he's been with her, but not that long, but he thinks he knows her enough, but does he, are these changes something else or are they really her, This is
Yeah.
probably like this whole movie is isolated too. They're alone in a cabin in the middle of the Canadian woods somewhere. So it's very constricting in that sense, and all they have is each other. And when someone that you fall in love with, you think is not who they turned out to be, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And how do you say you're full of shit? I don't believe you when you're trying
Yeah.
to be like the understanding, loving person.
Yeah. Which he does several times. We need to leave. We need to go back home. We need to go back to New York or Jersey. Or I don't remember if it's New
They're in
York
New
or
York,
Jersey.
I think
New
Brooklyn.
York. And she's like, no, 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 I'm fine. Everything's fine. Nothing. And then some other weird, weird shit goes on and he's freaking out even more. But it's because it even starts out when they meet this couple that B knew as a kid. There's that at first this start of jealousy, like, wait a minute, is there something going on here? And then it realizes it's not that, it's something worse.
Yeah, they try to throw in that red herring,
Yeah.
but you're like, yeah, I'm not buying that.
But I think that it's such an important red herring because the Paul, right? I can't, for whatever reason I couldn't remember his name.
Yeah.
Um, he has nothing to hold on to in this movie. Because what B represents is like it represents his whole worldview, right? Kind of like you pointed out, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They're on B's property. So, like a place that she grew up. He's in her territory. He's kind of inside of her space. And as she slips away, he's got nothing. He's got nothing to sort of right him again. Um, and so he's grasping for some explanation. And so he's like, hey, and at some point you can hear the desperation where he's like, just it's fine if you had an affair. Let's just let's talk that through. But that's not what happened, probably.
No,
Um,
he's very out of his element. I mean, he's in a cabin. He's never been fishing in his life. He's a city boy out in the woods, and he is completely out of his element. So this just makes it all. He's helpless in a sense, and he's not like a big tough manly man kind of guy.
No,
You have
no.
to figure he's probably like a computer programmer back in the city
yeah,
Yeah,
where she grew up around here. She came here as a kid all the time. She knows the wilderness and
very definitely just very uncomfortable. And then plus the fact that the stuff that starts happening, nobody's going to know what the hell or how to react to stuff like that. And the confusion part when she's forgetting words or she forgets how to do something, we're not talking about an older couple. We're talking about young people. And he's like, I'm confused at why is this happening? What is going on? And again, she is always, oh, I'm fine. I'm tired. That's what it is. I'm
yeah.
tired.
there's a lot of really good formal stuff in here too. The cinematography is great, and it does such a good job. The cinematography and editing do such a great job in helping tell the story. One of the shots that I like so much, well, in general, there's a quality to the camera work where it's searching to find things a lot. There's sort of looks over here and it looks over there. There's a scene when they're in their shower together at the beginning where it's kind of exploring their bodies and like minute details, almost like they're explore the way that they're exploring each other's bodies. Which I thought was really nice little like sort of visual analogy. But there's a great shot when they first walk out with because they spend a lot of time on the water in this movie, which you're like, why do they keep going to the water? And then oh, that's why they went to the water eventually. uh, but but there's a really lovely shot the first time we know we kind of have a sense that that's where they're at because they're clearly in a marina, but we see Paul walk down the stairs and then the camera goes with him and we're tracking his face as we're seeing him see something. And I realized and I just really liked that shot. I thought it was a cool shot. And then there's a reversal where we see the lake, right? And it's not a very special shot in some ways, but I realized that that was really important because we were fixating on Paul's perspective for a minute, and that's the whole movie, right? The whole rest of the movie is us more and more and more identifying with Paul's helplessness in his perspective. And the editing, I think, does a really good job of picking that up too. Like the editors are really good at being wherever they need to be to convey the right emotion at the right time. And between two people, the question that always comes up is you're editing two people. It's like, do I need to be on the one who's talking or do I need to be on the one who's receiving information? And that's the struggle in a dialogue sequence between two people. And I thought the editing did a great job in this movie of always being where you needed to be as an audience member to know where the emotional center of the scene was.
I think the strength of this movie, like Chained, is in the actors, right? Because you have an entire film that is more or less just two people in every single scene, and that's it. And the whole first half of the movie or more is them showing building on the relationship, how much they are in love with each other. Oh, this is like the greatest honeymoon in a cabin where we just want to have sex and love each other. And then it just towards the end they slowly unravel all that and break it away. And how strong is your love really?
I think that for me, the script is what I think to me was really caught me, and even more so this time, because the first part of the movie we are seeing this couple and how much they love each other. So then when stuff starts to happen, it's like ripping off a band-aid really slow. It's just this they're being torn apart, and you're as the viewer are watching this like a road accident, going, I I, I know what's going to happen, and it sucks. Plus, there's a part, and this isn't giving anything away, when Paul goes to the restaurant again and he only finds Annie there, who looks pretty weird,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, "Where's Will?" He's hiding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first time I watched this movie, didn't catch that, but then later when you find out where he's hiding, when it comes to Paul, and then you're going, "Holy shit!"
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's in the script with the actors building these two characters up, and that's what makes this film hard to watch as they're getting pulled apart. That's where it's really effective.
Yeah. You feel bad for a young couple so in love to, um, have it all destroyed and broken.
And it sounds like we're talking about a drama, which this could easily be, and is for its first 62 or 65 minutes. And then it goes over the fucking rapids, like, and it really does turn into a body horror film. And I feel like we can't talk too much about how it does that without giving some stuff away that I think for folks who haven't seen it, it would be better for them to just see it. So if it sounds intriguing to you, but you're like, this doesn't sound like a horror movie, that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, this thing better turn into a horror movie at some point, or I'm going to raise hell when we get on the podcast. And it really does. It really, really does. And so all of that is building for you this emotional connection. So when the horror happens, it's 10 times as horrific. And it
Yeah.
also adds in an element that horror often misses, which is tragedy. Very often when a murder happens in a horror movie, it's, we talk about kill counts and all that stuff. In this movie, when any kind of violence happens to anybody, you feel it to your toes.
Yeah. Yeah. It again, that's the thing that really drew me into this was the acting and how it makes you feel. And yeah, it is a horror film because it will scare the shit out of you at moments. It'll terrify you, and it doesn't make you feel too happy.
And like good horror, it will bum you out.
Yeah, I guess maybe we should recommend if people watching or listening to this podcast do not watch all three of these films back to back.
Or yeah, get some Ativan or something so you can sleep after.
For those not familiar with the actors, Harry Treadaway was in Cockneys versus Zombies, and
Which I recommend.
yeah, that was a good film. And Rose Leslie was in Game of Thrones. She was the redheaded wildling.
The Wildling, yeah. I could not
Yeah.
place her at first, and I was like, how could I not place her at first? And I think it was just because she was playing like just a normal girl rather than like a nearly feral, like Dungeons and Dragons lady.
Those redheads, man, you can't trust them. They're fucking dangerous.
Well, Treadaway was also in the Showtime's Penny Dreadful series playing Dr. Frankenstein as well.
That's where I know him from. I knew him
Yeah,
from something.
right.
He also looks like a friend of mine a little bit, but I was like, he's from something, and that's what it was. Penny Dreadful. That's a good
Yeah.
show.
And I think both of them really hadn't broke before this movie, so they were able to get them right before
Mhm.
that, even though I think she was in Game of Thrones just before this came out or started. But she hadn't exploded or that show hadn't exploded yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the last film, high quality actors literally carrying the whole film on their shoulders. Um, and yeah, amazing performances.
And another tight, low budget film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Minimal location. You're looking at, again, one house, two characters for almost the majority of the film, just like Chained.
Yeah.
The thing that I like too is watching one of the interviews with the director Lee Janik mentioned that when they decided they were going to make this film, her and her writing partner started to go through ideas and concepts and thought of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and went, okay, well, this is going to be low budget. Let's whittle it down to a basic element. And the first time I had seen this, I hadn't seen that interview, completely clueless to that. Watching it this time, going, duh, it's right there.
I also
But
think that makes it seem more scary when it's so
yeah,
intimate like this.
exactly, because that's one of the scary parts of Invasion is the loss of your humanity on a grand scheme, which is could be
Yeah.
terrifying. But again, like we were talking, this is a one-on-one couple. It's a lot more personable than it is in the other versions of that movie.
It could
Well,
even be like, this could be a tiny fraction of a small square of a bigger picture. How it,
Yeah.
you know, an invasion of the body snatchers affected two people.
Mm-hmm.
well, I kept thinking that I was like, is this just happening here, or is this happening everywhere, and we're only seeing this little tiny snippet of it?
Yeah.
Is this a function? Because she grew up there, and we never hear any stories of her, any family members having anything weird happen. Um, we just have this happen at this one moment. So, I got the impression that it was very possible that this was happening all over the planet.
Now, just out in the woods. That's why you don't
So
go
that's
camping.
the only place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Don't
the
go
only
camping.
place. You stay in the city, you're fine.
Nothing bad happens there.
Nope.
It is one of those. I don't know if you should watch this while you're out camping or in a cabin in a remote area.
Or sitting with somebody, a significant other that you've ever had a fight with, or, you know, I was glad I
Although,
watched this one alone.
you imagine getting up the next morning and come out and seeing just plain white bread sitting on the frying
Burning
pan,
on the frying
going,
pan.
oh shit.
Gotta go.
Yeah, I'm changing the locks. Yeah.
No, highly effective. And again, I'm amazed at how similar um, that all three of these films are. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
we all randomly chose what we were going to pick, and god damn are they very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Small casts, slow burns, hard to watch. Every one
Very
of them touches
powerful.
every one of them touches family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happy times.
So for our last film of the night, Relic from 2020, it was directed and co-written by Natalie Erica James, and Relic is her first full-length feature. And like Honeymoon, I don't want to give too much of this away because I think going in knowing little makes it very effective. But a brief synopsis is: when Edna, an elderly woman, goes missing from her home, her daughter Kay and granddaughter Sam travel to the home to search for her. After a few days, Edna just happens to show back up and start making coffee in the kitchen as if nothing happened. She sidesteps the conversation anytime her daughter presses her and just says she's fine and doesn't remember. As days go on, Edna's apparent Alzheimer's starts to show more, and Kay starts to look into nursing homes, while Sam decides she wants to move in and help her grandmother. But there may be more than just Alzheimer's at play here, as Edna is caught talking to no one and claims there are people in the house. Or perhaps it is all in her head. In what is a crossover haunted house slash dealing with the elderly type movie unfolds, out of nowhere, Sam discovers a whole hidden hallway inside the house that leads to other rooms that makes the house seem bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And that's when things really start to get weird. Revealing any more would be saying too much, and this one needs to be experienced on your own without knowing what else unfolds. Um, the first time I saw this, I absolutely loved it because it plays on something I really enjoy in movies is when you're in a house and you find something that is you find a secret wall or a hallway or a room or something that is from the inside opens up something grand, but on the outside it seems completely impossible. I think that's such a fascinating concept. It's not done too often. I first came across something like that in the book House of Leaves, which I don't know if anyone's read. The first half of the book is great. The second half turns into one of the worst books I've ever read. So, and it completely derails itself from where it is in the beginning. But to me, this is one of my favorite horror films that I've seen in the last 5 years. I think it was very creative in what it did because it is, while a horror film, it also somewhat disguises itself as a film about dealing with Alzheimer's. And that alone is terrifying enough. And if you've ever had to deal with someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, it's literally heartbreaking and terrifying, and also scary to think that you may one day yourself have to go down this road. So it hits you on totally different levels, because you got the elderly Alzheimer's on one side, and then you got I'm pretty sure I saw a shadow lurking in the corner of this house on the other side, or under the bed, and that was kind of fucking creepy. So it really it hits you from all different directions. How about you guys?
I hadn't even thought about me getting Alzheimer's. Great. Now I gotta go down that path.
You'll forget about it tomorrow.
Right. So this movie has, first of all, I think I think all three of our films are amazing. I love all of them that we've shown, or that we've talked about tonight. I like this one a lot. It was my first time seeing it. At first, I was concerned because it felt very much like a film. One of my favorite films of the last decade, for sure, is the 2014 film, The Taking of Deborah Logan,
Yeah,
which this feels a lot like. It's both of them are explorations of a now sort of aging woman who has gotten Alzheimer's, and the people who are trying to take care of her. In both cases, a daughter who the relationship is kind of strange. So I was like, how much is this going to be like that? And there's a kind of body horror monstrousness that crops up in this that reminded me also a little bit of The Taking of Deborah Logan. That said, it didn't feel derivative. They both feel like their own films, and yeah, I really like this one. It's again another slow burn. It is, though, I think of all three of our films, the most obviously a horror film of all three. I mean, like, it does some straight up horror movie shit, and it is a terrifying movie at times.
yeah,
Yeah, this one's a tough watch.
Unlike the
And
other
it,
two, which were a walk in the park.
well, yeah, yeah. In one of the interviews I saw with the director, the genesis of this is she went back to Japan to visit her grandmother who was suffering from Alzheimer's, and she had no record. She didn't know who she was, and I love the fact that someone took a personal tragedy or trauma and developed that into a story that is more than that. Um, you have three main characters that are carrying the film, all completely different. And at times, as the film starts, you're like, okay, she's obviously having issues with her remembering and stuff. But then, as the audience, to Damien's point, we start to see things. You're going, okay, wait a minute. Then I'm not suffering from it, but there's something fucking over there. What the hell is going on? And then it leads to more and more that you realize that as the horror starts to come out more and more, there's much more going on. Then you have the daughter and the granddaughter watching this happen. And
right.
then they start to realize that there's much more than what they thought. And then that's terrifying or heartbreaking because they see you're seeing a loved one go through this. Um, one of the things that I didn't catch the first time that I did this time, and this is me just thinking off the wall, when the granddaughter gets caught in this labyrinth type of thing, where the room gets smaller or she turns around and where she just came from is now closed off. If that's supposed to be a literal translation to dementia,
Yeah, I
where
think it's
you're,
absolutely a metaphor for sure.
Well,
yeah, because I'm watching it this time and going, oh, because at first you're going, this makes no fucking sense. This is not a huge mansion. Where are all this state? But all these hallways that she's going through is cluttered with memories, with
Yeah.
yeah,
stuff.
yep,
And watching it this time, and I'm start to realize that, and I went, holy shit! It still doesn't take away from the fact that you're going to feel like crap when this movie's over, but it again, it's so well done. The cast carries it. I love the fact that the middle daughter, Emily Mortimer, doesn't want to deal with the problem. She wants to
yeah,
put her mom in a home, and there's obviously some sort of a frictional relationship with her daughter. And then the granddaughter wants to help the grandmother. She believes her, and then even she's like, "Okay, wait a minute, something's fucked up here."
Yeah.
So it goes through this different parallels of who believes what and who believes who and whose side is you are you on, um, but also the fact that the grandmother Robin Nevin is so fucking good in this, and
Yeah.
like Jill Larson in Taking of Deborah Logan. I mean, she can just look at you and fucking creep you out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she is so good. And I saw an interview with her, and you're looking at her going, "Wait, that's the same lady." So kudos to the makeup people because she is terrifying looking in this film and not in real life.
I mean, this whole film is so filled with metaphors and symbolism,
Yeah,
and especially towards the end, you can't look at things literally, or it just won't make any sense. The whole end of this movie is symbolic of the disease itself, and every little thing, like there's black mold all over the house, but it's not
Which,
physical. I mean, it's physical, like black mold, but it's also representing her Alzheimer's infecting the house, and also it's coming from there's a whole little side story with the great grandfather being neglected when he was died, and the stained glass window that becomes the front door of her house. That's also infecting the house that the grandmother's now living in. So there's so much, like you said, the hallway cluttered with memories and getting lost and stuff, and that's like representing being lost in the mind of someone with dementia. I mean, there's just so many layers to peel away in this movie, and you really have to almost view it that way, especially at the end when things are literally getting peeled away.
right.
layers are peeled away.
Yeah, like one of the things that early on I found myself really intrigued or really excited about this movie was that it understood things that happen as people who haven't yet reached their winter years experience when they're around people who are older, right? So I remember as a little kid always being terrified that I would find my grandma dead. I stayed with my grandma all the time, and I just knew she was a lot older than me. She had my mom when she was 40. So my mom had me when she was 19. So, my grandma was well into her 70s by the time I was conscious. And I knew that people died in their 70s when I was a little kid. So I was always freaked out about that. And that scene, now they had a little bit more reason why, but there's that scene early on when they're anticipating. They hope they're not going to find mom dead, but they think they very well might. And there's that scene where they show it, and there's this breathing. All you hear in the soundtrack is the daughter breathing as she walks in, and it triggered so many things in me. I was like, these people they understand what it's like to be around somebody that you love and yet watch them go through this aging process. Because the other thing that happens in this movie is they kind of start talking around her on some levels, like, we should do this for Graham and we should do this for mom. And in the meantime, nobody's actually asking her what she wants, which is another thing that happens, I think, when you get a little older. And she takes great umbrage to that, which we're never sure if that umbrage is her personality coming out or the dementia exactly or the Alzheimer's exactly. So I feel like, in addition to sort of like elevating these concepts about the dementia up um to being the horror in the movie, they also do a good job of just grounding the emotions of the movie in things that anybody who's been around people who are older and kind of have to deal with as a general rule.
Yeah, that what makes it one of my favorite horror films that I've seen recently is because it's unlike any other film that I can recall, in the sense that, like I said earlier, it's frightening, and like dementia, it's a terrifying thing. It's a terrifying sickness, and I think they portray it so believable in this movie that you actually feel for all the characters. And at the same time, there's really good scares. And if you're looking, like, I don't want to say this is like a thinking man's horror film, but if you're looking for some kind of like we said earlier, slumber party massacre, this isn't a good time. There's plenty in here that you're like, what? This doesn't make any sense, because it's not it's not a very linear film. It's a lot almost European in a sense that it's more about visuals and symbolism than it is about telling exactly what's happening in every scene. It doesn't seem like it makes sense, but you have to think about it and then like, oh yeah, okay, now I get why they did that. I get why they showed that. The ending now makes sense. It's
Yeah.
like I've never seen a movie that was impactful for two different reasons and equally as effective in both.
This isn't a cut though, but I feel like if that's people's problem with it as they're watching it, just as John did, dig into the metaphors, and they are all. None of these none of these are just them playing with images for the sake of playing with images. I
Yeah,
feel like every one of these symbols is truly a symbol. It's a
right.
symbol of something. It is a
Yeah,
metaphor for something.
it's not like an Argento film or something where it's just you're looking at beautiful colors and style like that.
No,
Right, yeah.
it's all pre thought out, planned right from the beginning, but incorporated into a horror film, which I think is where the genius is.
Yeah,
They're taking something very real, making it literal, and very very effective. And years and years ago, I was talking with another friend of mine about I don't like films that are going to make me feel bad, and this is kind of one of those. But he had said I have to give any film credit that's going to make me feel that way, whether you're grossed out, whether you're scared, whether you feel bad, and ever since, and this was decades ago, ever since then, I do have to admire films. I think this is very well made. It's a very smart film. Again, incredible acting. But if you walk away from this film feeling differently, that's the whole point. It's a terrifying film, both in a fictional aspect, but also in a very real life, even more powerful story there.
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
and and like you mentioned with Deborah Logan again, both of them are dealing with dementia, and both of them are hard to watch at times because you're seeing this person that is with around loved ones that is disappearing.
and I think if you ever experienced it firsthand yourself, it makes it all the much worse.
Hmm.
Yeah. But I do feel like the ending leaves itself open to interpretation because there was something about it that felt not good, but felt like there was an acceptance of something that a lot of us try hard to push away as hard as we can, that there's a certain kind of acceptance, even though there was still a horror in that acceptance that
Yep.
was sort of that I think you could read the ending in a couple of different ways. And this film, I feel like you could walk away from mostly being bummed out, but a little bit like that ending might leave you with something to chew on that might not take you to a terrible place.
Yeah, I think, like you said, you're getting a feeling this film is making you feel something, and that's good or bad. And when a film can do that,
Yeah.
ultimately, it's a good film. I look at, there's plenty of films that I love and they make me feel great, and they're comfort films or something like that. But I also look at films like, the movie Kids pissed me off so much. I wanted to fucking punch every character in that movie, but I'm like, you know what? This movie made me so angry. How can I not like it because it got this emotion out of me? Whether I liked the emotion it brought out or not, that's an effective movie. I look at a movie like Serbian Film, which fucking depressed me for days after I watched it, and horrifying things in it. It got an emotion out of me, and that's more said that can be said than a lot of other films. So that emotion doesn't always have to be a good emotion or an enjoyment per se to be a good film. As long as it doesn't
Ar-
piss you off because it's boring, you know.
Army of Darkness got an emotion out of you, didn't
Yeah, well,
it? No, but I completely agree with you. I think that this is one of those, I think forewarned is important because you have to be in the mood for something like
yeah,
it. And I
it's a
gotta
heavy
say,
film.
I don't even know if I was in the mood, but I found my way into the mood. It just all three of these movies I was just impressed with after I walked away from them. I told my wife, I was like, man, I've been watching some hard movies. She hasn't joined me for any but the last one, but I was like, the last two were just a kick in the teeth. And she's like, I'm sorry that you had to watch such difficult movies. And I was like, no, 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 no. They're amazing,
Yeah.
but they're just hard movies. And I think that is a sign to me. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I feel like I have matured as a watcher, as a viewer, that I've really gotten to a point where it's not that I prefer movies that are difficult, but that I can say a movie was difficult, that I didn't quote unquote enjoy the experience, but that I got a tremendous amount out of it. It's like, you exercise and sometimes you don't want to exercise, but you're glad you exercised. This is a different kind of exercise.
Yeah.
Don't know what that's like.
Like,
But
like
I will say, while I was watching it, especially the second time, one of the parts that was uncomfortable for me was watching it with my wife, who has had personal experience dealing with someone with dementia. So as I'm watching this, I'm realizing the room's getting darker
Yeah.
and more uncomfortable because it's affecting her in a very more of a personal level. We talked about it afterwards, and then when I brought up about the whole or the whole labyrinth type of thing, she's like, that's a good point. I didn't catch that. But again, talking about it, I think helps because you're not in that downward spiral, so to speak. But yeah, if you had personal experience with this could be a even harder watch.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is because that grandma that I was talking about, maybe the closest person in my life, died of Alzheimer's. Um, but I don't know. I think that these movies, this and The Taking of Deborah Logan, are such important metaphors for how that feels, that to me it's not a bummer so much as it is like, oh, they were able to make art of this thing and
Yeah,
and take those emotions and make them real. So it doesn't feel like revisiting them exactly to me. It feels like exercising them. Not exercise, but like exorcist exercising them, getting them
yeah.
out and
yeah,
getting them to
yeah.
the surface, getting them out.
Well,
Um
and like I said, I love the fact that she took a very tragic element of her own personal life and created a story intertwined with that. And
yeah.
to your point, Aaron, I think that's what she was doing with her own personal trauma was exercising that.
Sometimes these artists, you have that, you just have to get this story out of you to free yourself.
Yeah, and it's nice that in every one of these cases, I feel like whatever they were trying to get out, they managed to take us on a ride, that I found very effective and that I think was good for me anyway, to try to play with some of those same ideas in a way that helped kind of free them up a little bit. I don't know what the first one does. I don't feel like I don't feel like I understand my inner serial killer any better, but,
and
Just make
and
you have a dirt floor and plenty of lime
and
or
like
lye
the
or
the
whatever that
other
was.
like the other two movies, minimal location, one location, really, again, a house, three characters in the entire movie for the most part.
right.
These are all very condensed, claustrophobic films.
Yeah.
But it's funny how they travel because we've got the first movie, which is hyper real, which is funny because that's Jennifer Lynch, David Lynch's daughter.
Yeah,
You think that that's going to go off into crazy surreal town, but it never does. It's just super,
it's actually
super hyper real.
the most real of all these films. Well, actually,
Yeah.
well, yeah, the only real film out of all these films.
And then you've got the middle film, which literally transitions from being hyper real to being not so real. And then this movie has sort of the most surreal elements about it. I mean, there's definitely some crazy stuff that happens visually in this movie. So it's also kind of a nice little way to watch them, to go from, realism all the way through to like expressionism, in style, and somewhere in between in the middle movie.
And you know what I like about the scares in this film is they're all very subtle. They're not in your face. They're not completely unrealistic in a sense of something that you can never really believe would happen or something. It's all a very subtle thing you think you're seeing, but it's if you blinked, you might have missed it. It
Yeah.
just brings a much more believability to the fear.
Instead of cheap jump scares.
Yeah.
that last, and I don't know how to talk about it without giving it away, but there's that scene at the end when something's chasing them down the hallway that I was like, blah, 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 yeah, get away
Yeah.
from it.
I do think it's interesting comparing all three of the films that the Chained and this one, you have this closed space of the house, but in Honeymoon you're out in the cabin and out on the lake, but you almost get that same sense of claustrophobia that you're still closed in. So even though you're out in this wide open area, it still develops that same sense of being trapped.
That's the thing I noticed about all three of these movies, though, is that they all have moments. In Chained, the house is in the middle of nowhere, and they make it a point to go outside at one point and show you how big everything around it is. And they scream, "Hey, hey!" Get it all out. Same thing's true of the second movie. There's this big lake. They make a point of saying, "Why don't you skinny dip?" There's literally no one around. It's just free forever. And in the last movie in Relic, they go out into the woods, right, where mom's out there eating pictures and burying them,
Yeah.
but you're out in the woods and you see how big that world is. So I think that's important, though. Like, I think if we'd only seen everything from inside the house, it wouldn't have had quite the same effect. It's like we talked about the last time that we had an episode that we recorded. We talked about that difference where you need kind of like
Yeah.
ups and downs.
So Chain could have been a completely different movie. Like, can you imagine everything that happened in Chain happens inside the house? At the end, they exit the house and it's the middle of a crowded suburb. That would have gave it a completely different feel for that movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
For some reason, after Chained, I wanted to get the air freshener and just started spraying it around the house.
So once again, we did this thing where completely inadvertently we picked three movies that seem to have some weird through line and make sense watching as a group of movies. I don't know how this always happens. It freaks me out.
And we had a huge list to go through.
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean, we came up with a bunch of different films by female directors, and all of them, a lot of really good titles. And for some reason, I know that when we first started talking about it, I immediately went to Honeymoon because I hadn't seen it since I originally did back almost 10 years ago. Because I knew of the director, and then I'm going to do Relic. Oh, let's do Chain, and I'm like, holy crap! And then as we watched them, you're going, okay, not only is this a bad idea for these three films, but the similarities are amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I was originally going to pick Pet Cemetery because I do truly love that movie. But then I was like, Relic was, like I said, is one of my favorite horror films of the last 5 years. And I feel like people need to experience this movie. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that, like, you may see it and like I don't get it. That was just dumb, But for me, it just hit all these right buttons, and I don't know. Maybe I'm a little hard on films, and it takes a lot for me to see something that I love and consider, one of the best films I've seen in a few years. But Relic was one that I was like, I have to share this for this episode. Like, this is the one I need to let people know about.
Yeah. So, quick note: make sure you're looking for Relic and not the
The
Relic.
Relic.
Yeah.
Completely different movie.
Which I
Yeah.
also enjoyed, though.
Yeah,
It's a
good
little
movie.
dark. It's a little dark.
It's a little
Not in
dark, but
tone.
monster running
But
around in the museum is always fun.
Yeah.
when years and years ago, when I was writing my book, I did a chapter on the Oscars and how the horror genre is consistently snubbed by the Oscars. And 2014, because I think when I wrote that, it was around 2015, or at least that chapter of it. The Babadook came out, Honeymoon came out, the Taking of Deborah Logan came out, and Starry Eyes, I think, came out all in the same year. You have three films with very, very strong female performances.
Mhm.
Obviously, they're never going to get nominated for an Oscar, but it was one of those things that it's just like those movies are effective partially because of that actress. And I think we have that in all three of these movies, not Chained with a female actress, but with the actors that are going above and beyond the story. And maybe it's because there's a limited cast, or the story is that good, or the characters are that well written. But that all is on their shoulders, and they really, really bring it to fruition.
Yeah, watching these movies, I kept thinking, because this is the theme of the episode. Is the first time that we're going to focus on women directors, and I hope that, kind of like you were alluding to at the beginning, Damien, I hope that we just find our way into more women directors without having to be so explicit about it in the future. But I felt like the fact that we hadn't managed to get to it yet meant that we had to be had to address it explicitly at least once, right?
Sure.
But I kept thinking as I went through this, like, did these have to be women directors? And I don't know that any of them did, although I felt like the third one, which is about, a grandmother, mother, and daughter's relationship, it probably didn't hurt anything that it was, directed by someone who would be able to experience that, be in that continuum in some way. But
Right.
then I remembered that The Taking of Deborah Logan, which explores the same things, was directed by a man. So I don't know. But on the other hand, I'm super happy to see that women are not just participating, but are making such kick-ass contributions to the genre that these are three films that I can't recommend any of them any more highly. I feel like every one of them has something that brings a series of emotions that you don't see every day in modern horror, or I shouldn't say in modern horror films, but in horror films in general.
Plus the fact that almost all of these are within the last decade, or 15 or
Yeah.
20, 15 years.
Yeah.
So it going back to, well, there's nothing good coming out. Well, bullshit. Not
Yeah.
only are there really good stuff coming out, some of them are directed by women. So it's a really cool time to be seeing these things that are so effective, um, both because they're really good movies and that there's more and more that are being directed by women.
I'm starting to realize, though, that is such a function of our age as horror fans. Because as I look in sort of young people horror forums and places where young people are watching horror movies, nobody young is saying that. There's lots of great horror movies coming out if you're 20 years old. There's been, and they grew up on great horror movies and they love the stuff that's coming out and they've got a lot to say about it. It's just old guys who are like, there hadn't been a good horror movie since Friday the 13th, part 11, like whatever.
That's who I was totally talking to, Aaron, our older crowd that, once they went to color, fuck all that shit. All went down after that.
My running joke on the show is, of course, now we have really managed to offend the last monster kid who listened to our show.
And something else, maybe, I don't know if this is a conscious thing because they're women directors, but despite all the subject matter in each of these films, none of these films were overly violent or gory.
No, no, even Chained. And again, I think that was more implied.
Yeah.
Although I got to say, there's a moment in Honeymoon where I was like, woo, God damn.
Yeah. Yes, there was. Yes, there was.
That part where I went, I'm pretty happy I'm a guy. Pretty happy I'm a guy right now.
Yeah. That was
Yeah. Yeah. And we can't talk about what it is because it really does give too much away. But holy shit, was that a moment where I was like, that's eye-watering right there. Everything about that. God damn. So not particularly gory, but certainly, disgusting. It was really disgusting. Yeah.
No, and so, right, like maybe not something so visceral for Chain, but in Honeymoon and Relic, there are definitely disgusting elements happening for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I felt like in Chained, like I said, that it was more like, there was some gore. I mean, maybe we're just jaded now, but that one girl gets her throat slashed and we see it come open and she's laying on the floor bleeding out.
But nothing too, like, it was one scene. It wasn't like,
yeah,
gratuitous or.
Yeah, it was nothing gratuitous.
And actually that the fact that it wasn't really gratuitous, he's like, hell with it, and cuts her throat and that's it, was just so fucking cold that bothered me more than the actual physical violence. It was more of what he just did.
And the fact that as you get to the end of that scene and Rabbit looks at him and goes, "Carotid artery," you realize that that person's life was just basically the same as, I mean, it was functionally that they were doing a biology experiment. He
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
bringing someone home to be like, I want to show you how the carotid artery works. So this young woman's going to lose her life today. Um, and that whole sequence when they were looking at the whatever the fuck that one body part was, and he was like, tumor, carcinoma, where they were just taking pieces of people apart. It's like, so there is that too. I forgot about that until I just started spieling about it. But there's that scene where they're examining a, I don't know, spleen at the dinner table at that one moment. But you're right, this is not, street trash. This is not anything that is over the top with its gore. None of these films are.
So is that something that can be said, is there any women directors who are making something like street trash, or are they more interested in making, for lack of a better term, because I hate to say it, but smarter movies?
Well, keep in mind, while Street Trash wasn't directed by a woman, the makeup artist was a woman. So all the melting, all the gore, that was a female that did all that. So she didn't direct it, but she came up with some really fucked up stuff.
She had a job to do that. Lieberman was
And she
telling her
did.
what the hell to do.
And I mean, it's not the same thing, and I don't even know if it's kosher to bring them up anymore, but the Soska sisters got into some pretty hard gore, and they got into body horror at times.
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely got
American
into
Mary.
body horror, and like Hooker, a dead hooker in a trunk is. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's exploitation in a little bit of a sense, but it wasn't like a straight up horror type film. And as like there are other films like American Mary and stuff. I think they took the stories more serious in tone than doing something more exploitive and gratuitous.
Yeah, I can't think of a single example of, like a Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers
Right.
as directed by pick a woman director.
Yeah,
I
that's
can't
what
think
I
of
mean.
any of that. I don't even know what that would look like because that's like a TNA movie, and I can't imagine many women who would be down to. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to. I don't want to suggest that. I bet there's lots of women who would love to direct a TNA horror movie. I bet.
There may
I
well
bet
have
Darcy would.
been. Yeah, right. But I mean, even like Humanoids from the Deep, Roger Corman put that all in himself.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a controversial one because if folks haven't realized it yet, we've alluded to it a few times. But Humanoids from the Deep is notoriously directed by a woman who got very upset after the film came out, and it's filled with sex scenes and nudity and things that she didn't put
Rampant.
in. Yeah, still a great movie.
Yes, it is for all the right reasons. I don't know if you guys know. If you go online, there's a short film version of Relic called Cresswick that she did. Same director did, Natalie Erica James. Came out in 2017. That was the genesis of this film.
I read about it, but I didn't watch it.
Yeah, it's different, but it's kind of the same element. Um, but then I looked on what her upcoming project is, and it's a film called Apartment 7A, and it said plot kept under wraps. And then I started looking at the cast names, not the names, but the character names. Guy Woodhouse, Rosemary Woodhouse, Roman Castevet. I'm like, okay, now I'm really intrigued on what the hell this movie is. Because even they've got Dr. Saperstein. Oh, yeah, and Satan is in it too. So I have no idea what this movie's going to be about. But now I'm intrigued.
Whatever happened to Rosemary's Baby Part 2?
Look what happened to Rosemary's
Oh, look
Baby.
what happened to Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, it bombed. That's what it happened.
We'll save that one for another TV horrors episode.
Not picking that one.
Obviously, there are many more horror films helmed by women, but hopefully you've gotten a few new titles to explore and help add to your therapy bill going forward in your own life. If you've got some favorite women directors, please head over to our Facebook page or Instagram account and tell us all about them. And most importantly, go out there and find some new horror directed by women because, as you know, it's good for you.